Welcome to today's podcast with the Economic Development Council of Colorado and their silver sponsor, HdL Companies. My name is Kim Woodworth. I'm the Operations Director for EDCC, and I am pleased to welcome our guests, Kimberly Kosnak, who is the Strategic Account Executive, as well as Luis Nunez, who is the Director of Economic Development with HdL Companies. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Kimberly first. Kimberly, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Kimberly Konzak. I am the Strategic Account Executive at HdL Companies, and I'm very excited to be a part of the Economic Development Council of Colorado, proud sponsor, and excited to share with you all today some insights on economic development.
Great, thank you so much. And Luis Nunez.
Hi, my name is Luis Nunez. I'm the Director of Economic Development with HdL Companies, and I'm excited to be with you today to provide you some insight on opportunity zones and also strategic planning.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about HdL Companies and what you do, Kimberly?
Yes, HdL Companies provides revenue insights and services to local governments. So anything from assisting local governments with collecting their revenue, whether it be from sales tax or lodgings tax, transactions tax, business licensing, to economic development products and services, analyzing retail, analytics, void analysis, reporting, forecasting, kind of all things revenue.
Okay, great. So, Luis, you had mentioned opportunity zones. Can you tell us a little bit, the basics about the Opportunity Zones program and its impact on local government?
Absolutely. So the program offers 3 tax incentives for investing in low-income communities through a qualified opportunity fund. The first incentive type is a temporary deferral, and that is a temporary deferral of inclusion in taxable income for capital gains reinvested into an opportunity fund. The deferred gain must be recognized on the earlier of the date on which the opportunity zone investment is disposed of, or December 31, 2026. So you'll often hear people referring to that date as a big milestone in the program. The second type of incentive is a step up in basis, and that means for capital gains reinvested in an opportunity fund, the basis is increased by 10% if the investment in the opportunity fund is held by the taxpayer for at least 5 years, and by an additional 5% if held for at least 7 years. So that thereby excludes up to 15% of the original gain from being taxed. And then the third part of the program is a permanent exclusion from taxable income of capital gains from the sale or exchange of an investment in an opportunity fund if the investment is held for at least 10 years. Again, that goes back to the milestone year of 2026. And this exclusion only applies to gains accrued after an investment in an opportunity fund.
Great. So I know that you've been working around the nation. Can you give us an example of what this looks like in a community?
Sure. So one of the very first examples that we have in the entire country, actually, that I'm pretty familiar with is one in Michigan City, Indiana, where they developed a prospectus, or what is also referred to as a community profile, that really homes in on the assets within a community. So they were the first ones that actually closed on a property within an opportunity zone. And the property is located in a historic district, particularly we're talking about the historic Elston Grove district. And this involved approximately a building of 12,000 square feet that used to serve as a bottling plant for a brewery, but was vacant for many years. The building itself was actually built in 1870 and there were just generations of families and neighbors that had grown up kind of, looking at these iconic structures being vacant for many years, and they fell into disrepair. And so the plans for the building as part of this opportunity zone funding included fully rehabbing the property both inside and exterior to include 3 residential units on the second floor of the structure and then commercial on the first floor. And again, the property falls under historic Elston Grove design guidelines within a Michigan City Historic District. So it also combines incentive types. The local incentive is the historic district incentive, which in this particular case refers to a facade improvement program. And then there's also an upper story residential incentive program. So Michigan City was obviously very ready to receive the program with this particular property.
And what kind of, have we seen any outcomes that have come from that project within that community? Have you seen, do we have any impacts so far of what that has done for that community?
No, so that is one of the issues with the Opportunity Zone program in general, is that the program itself did not include any sort of metrics or any particular guidance about how to measure the impact on the community. So all we know is the information that I have shared with our audience today, that the property has actually been rehabbed, and it is in a historic district again. But as far as measuring the impact on the greater community, that is definitely not something that can necessarily be measured at this point in time. It's too early to tell. And so we have to kind of stay tuned and watch out for that particular redevelopment to see the long-term impact, if you will, of the program on Michigan City in particular.
I'd be very curious to see, the measuring of the impacts of these communities, because it can definitely be a program to really help revitalize areas within our communities that have been blighted or, have been, fall into disrepair. Are there any other concerns with the opportunity zones, like in relation to the diversity or inclusion within those communities?
Absolutely. So that is definitely one of the concerns. Obviously, if you remember, opportunity zones are by definition low income and or distressed areas. So there are challenges to these sites. A lot of local governments are finding that they did not have the vision in place to really kind of optimize the program, obviously. And in particular, now that diversity and equity and inclusion is such a big issue, going back to the metric component or lack thereof within the program, that is going to be very challenging for local governments to track or measure. Especially because participants, and I'm talking about investors and developers, they have no real obligation as part of the federal guidelines to tell local officials exactly how that impact is to take place.
So coming from your standpoint and from your strategic planning efforts, do you have any recommendations that that you have for these communities that are looking at these issues?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the best practices that has emerged from Opportunity Zone program has been what's called an Opportunity Zone prospectus. So a prospectus is basically sort of a marketing tool or a best practice where local governments tout their assets. It's very similar to a community profile, but what a lot of prospectus or a lot of communities that have gone through the process of developing a prospectus are coming to find out is that that's a tool that has basically been in place for a long time. And so, for example, Avon, Colorado, which is a community just west of the Denver metro area, had one opportunity zone, and they developed a prospectus, but they didn't find the prospectus to be anything particularly helpful. And the reason for that is because the prospectus was essentially a community profile without any particular emphasis on the opportunity zone site or anything related to infrastructure. So it has to be very site specific, I think, to make an impact on the investment and development community. So there's definitely a disconnect between the local governments and their redevelopment agencies, for example, and the federal government program, which is the Opportunity Zone program.
So what is your recommendation to make these prospectuses more, investment friendly?
Sure. So one of the things that I would recommend is that, much like the ARA program back in 2009 under the Obama administration, where a lot of municipalities were caught off guard because a lot of their projects were not shovel ready. This is one where a community really has to embrace what I refer to as being business ready. And for me, that really goes back to some bread and butter basics for municipalities. And that's one of the reasons that we're here, obviously, with our audience today, is that we want to emphasize the importance of being strategic to really accept this program or optimize the use of this program. And to me, being strategic means that you have to be obviously business ready, but that you have to focus on some basic economic development tools like having infrastructure in place, being able to market your sites, particularly if they are in an opportunity zone, and then having a vision beyond just the opportunity zone sites. A lot of times, if you're in a community that does not have opportunity zones, you need to be focused on layering incentives and taking sort of what works within the program and applying that to your community. If you have a tax increment financing zone, making sure that you not only have that financial mechanism in place, but that you also have other strategies in place to fully, again, have a high impact project that's really going to have some kind of measurable impact on the greater community. If it's a low income community, a distressed area, there has to be some sort of a metric that you can actually track down in the future. For example, one such metric would be the percentage of affordable housing dedicated to a specific project if it's a housing project.
So we have heard some frustration with communities who might have not fallen within the census tract to receive opportunity zones. You had mentioned that communities who don't have opportunity zones still could use this as a tool, really more for the attracting the investment or being business ready. Can you talk a little bit more about what communities who don't have opportunity zones can do, utilizing the tools that they do have, but also understanding how opportunity zones really kind of created this, more of just an idea of being able to attract the investment into your community. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, I think that it's important for local governments and their agencies to really think about, what strategies they can put in place now. So, for example, if you don't have an opportunity zone designated area, I think, one of the major issues that we see in a lot of communities, going back to the affordable housing issue, is missing middle housing. Which is a larger problem that we see nationally. And I think, as more citizens are displaced from their jobs as a result of the pandemic, this will become a bigger issue within communities. And so, a lot of people are not going to be able to afford your traditional single family residential house, so, let's look at other types of housing to accommodate people, like townhomes and just non-traditional housing. And again, I want to emphasize that phrase, missing middle housing. If you haven't, heard that phrase, it's important to get to know that phrase and what that really means at the local government level. And then, there has to be an emphasis again on infrastructure. It's a lot more expensive for investors and developers to look at greenfield sites. So I think local governments need to continue to be very focused on redevelopment opportunities, particularly infill opportunities, especially if you're in an inner ring suburb, for example, in the Denver metro area. You have to really hone in on, infill opportunities. If you're completely built out, that's another big thing to look out for. And then also, I would say emerging trends in the real estate community, and then other disruptive forces like technology, and just having a real estate market awareness to really understand what is happening on the supply and demand side in your community, especially as it relates to the delivery of real estate projects like commercial projects. And again, I want to emphasize that when you're talking commercial projects, you're really thinking different sectors. So you're talking about retail, you're talking about industrial, you're talking about office, flex space. So all of those things are very important.
So say you're a community who has figured out what this looks like for their community. How do they start to attract that type of investment if they are a small rural community that's never done that before?
Yeah, I always, and I guess I can focus on the Denver metro area in particular. The metro area in Denver has very specific business targets. And I always advise some of my more rural clients in rural communities that one of the things to do is to try to figure out a way to leverage what is happening in the closest, largest community near you. And again, that would be what is happening in again, these different real estate markets, and what are some emerging trends there, and how can you take advantage of that? A big trend right now is obviously working from home. And I think that has really opened up the number of opportunities available to more rural communities. So, prep for that. Do you have internet? Is your internet speed, up to par with some other rural communities that are definitely looking at improving that so they can actually, take advantage of this new trend in people working from home. So again, always, be on the lookout for opportunities like that and how best to leverage them to your advantage from a competitive asset standpoint. If you're in a rural community, you always have to think outside the box, but sometimes, that box is a lot closer than I think you would give yourself credit for.
Very good. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I really appreciate your insight on opportunity zones. I actually really appreciate, too, being able to really get to know HdL Companies and what you guys are working and striving for. We appreciate your support in the economic development community, as well as for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. So once again, Kimberly Kosnak from HdL, as well as Luis Nunez, thank you so much for participating in this today.